Afternoon, everybody. So today we're going to go through our tender set markups process. So this is a process we've developed for anything when you send out a package of documents issued for tender. This is a typical process that we want to try to follow for that tender. So diving in, today's learning objectives. Today we're going to be talking about why we're going to do tender set markups. So the reasoning behind the tips and tricks and that kind of stuff. So we're going to cover things to consider doing tender markups and review a few examples. And Jerome's done a video presentation of walking us through the work process, including how to load the tool chest into Bluebeam and then some helpful tips and tricks when marking up your drawings. From there, we'll go into the ETRO way resource and things we're developing in the background. So then that way there's a knowledge capture from this, and then you guys can review it outside of this ETRO U module. And then we'll dive into any questions. So getting into this, why do we do it? Obviously, point number one, we want to eliminate the gray areas. We want to reduce the amount of scope gaps. It's all about clear communication. Starts the discussion with our trades, consultants, and us internally at ETRO to eliminate any subcontractor finger pointing or any questions from us internally as a group of like who's doing what. Obviously, figuring this stuff out early helps slow down any progress on site or any kind of reviews with shop drawings or anything where we're going to transition from one trade to another and help better clarify that design intent. So coordination, obviously, it's going to improve ETRO's team familiarity with the drawings, and it really helps get your head into the details. You're going to be spending a few days doing this type of detailed process. So it's all about making sure that you've allotted the time, but getting your head into the details and sussing out those RFIs that you can submit to the consultants for any kind of unique pieces, any assemblies that aren't clear in the details, or maybe rejigging the details to make sure it's constructible and that it actually makes sense to us as the builders. So this should assist with, again, asking questions to our trade partners, getting into the details with them. They're the experts. Utilize their expertise to help us solve the problems and provide feedback to the consultants. So then that way we're getting that good tender set to our trades, so then they can price it properly, eliminate those ambiguities, and really make us more productive overall. So things to think about, obviously, with coordination are think about who's installing what first. Does the way I'm scoping it out make a return trip for another trade? And does it cause a problem that maybe they've demobed completely and they need to make a return trip just to complete this one flashing or this one membrane overlap that you've detailed? So really take that into consideration when you're marking up the tender set. Communication. So this is our ETRO. It's ETRO outlining the expectations of these scope documents. So it's our first chance to telegraph to the trades how we think the job should be put together and what responsibility or what scope they should be responsible for. Confidence. So as far as this, it gives the trades a sense of security that we've gone through the drawings, done our homework, done a first vet, flagged any RFIs, and really make sure that the ETRO scope is what we want it to be. And then if anything's assigned to a subcontractor and they miss it, it's something for discussion. It's like, here, we're clearly communicating with you as far as what our intended scope for you is and what we would like. Let's discuss it and make any changes as need be. But at least at the end of the day, from completing this scope markup, you're really coming to the table with a complete set of drawings that every piece, every flashing, every membrane is scoped out to somebody, and it gives everybody kind of a peace of mind that we've done our homework. Contracts. So you're spending a ton of time doing these markups. It can take anywhere from like 2 to 4 days, depending on how detailed the set of drawings is and how big of a project. So use this as an Appendix C add-on. put it as a list of contract documents. Obviously, it'll cut down on your Appendix B verbiage. We have a standardized kind of catch-all comment to make sure that we refer to these drawings, but making sure that you've spent a ton of time doing this, use this document now to simplify your life later on down the road as far as your Appendix B. Let your markups speak for themselves, really. Construction schedule, doing these markups during tender, again, hopefully generates a lot of conversation, a lot of RFIs, a lot of coordination that we can solve in the tender process. So this is obviously more towards our estimating and pre-con team, but it helps solve a lot of that trade coordination that's going to go on site, as far as gets rid of incomplete or unique or custom details. And it really gets us into asking the question why it's been drawing this way, getting the consultants to make sure that they can validate their design, and if there's other ways to build it, a better way to build it. And then, of course, completeness. So it improves things like shop drawings later on down the road, because you can refer to it again as your contract document and be like, look, it was scoped out this way. You guys do have this unique flashing transition, and it was discussed and hopefully coordinated that way. So then that way the trade tying into that scope also understands that the trade previous to them is including for that unique piece or instance. So tips and tricks, things to consider, pitfalls, all that kind of fun stuff. Focus on the transitions between trades. So this is where the gray areas are always going to be. Obviously, if there's a big run of one trade's work, it's where it starts and stops in the boundary box to the next person, where there's that element of possibly missing something. So, you know, running through it at a high level, foundation waterproofing to exterior vertical wall cladding or windows, anything to do with openings, whether or not it be cladding to windows, cladding to louvers, window to louvers, whatever it's going to be, interior to exterior transitions, and then of course the starts and stops between all our sub trades. So we want to make sure that where that one trade stops and one trade starts, you've got that clean delineation line. And from a scoping perspective and a sequencing perspective, it makes sense for that trade to finish at that point, and then it makes it an easy transition from that next trade to finish or continue on and finish their scope of work without needing a double up or a visit months later down the road. So you look for those unique details, flashing transitions, and make a decision on who should do it. Obviously, we're not all experts in everything, so it's okay if you don't get it right the first time. It's all about trying to take that first stab at it, getting that conversation going, and just making sure that you have a measure in place to track your revisions, and making sure that through that process, it's really clear to us internally, and then our trades and consultants externally as far as where that transition happened and how we came to change that detail or change that scope. So whether it be, you know, clouding the revision in red and flagging it in the next R1 revision and making sure that those changes are clearly pronounced to the wider group, because obviously if you make a series of revisions, you want to make sure that progressively throughout the tender process, you're updating that document so it's current and new and issuing that to trades, so then that way they're bidding off the current scope delineation. Document your learnings. You're spending a ton of time marking up these details. Again, it can take anywhere from like 2 to 4 days of like solid scoping out. So you're going through in a really detailed process. You're submitting a ton of RFIs for any gray areas, understanding where the detail occurs, questioning how it's built, clarifying unidentified work materials or assemblies, making sure you understand where this detail occurs in the project. So making sure that details are clearly identified with grid lines, floor levels, all that kind of stuff. So you're documenting all those lessons learned and capturing that, so then that way when you come up with IFCs, hopefully all that information is in the set. We touched on it earlier, but think about sequencing. Which trade completes the work first? Does the trade for how you detailed it now make a return trip necessary? Is there a better way to scope it out so you can create a better workflow on site? Obviously, some of these things come with experience, so make sure that, you know, you have a review session with a superintendent or a project director and make sure that how you're scoping it out makes sense to the trades, and obviously speak to the trades. They're the experts in their field. They'll let you know whether or not this is typically done by somebody else and for what reason. So listen to them and incorporate those markups. Stay consistent with your markups. So again, it takes a ton of time, and you're going to be doing this over multiple days. So make sure that, and I'm guilty of this as well. Make sure that you're scoping it out the same way every day. Go back and look at your previous work product and make sure that that flashing type at the bottom of the window is scoped out to the curtain wall contractor, or this transition from inside to outside is scoped with the correct trade, so your sequencing flow is similar throughout all your details, and that you haven't swapped trade responsibilities midway through your markup between days. And then track your revisions. So as far as that, making sure, again, if you're changing something based on trade input, our own internal review, that you bubble and make it obvious to the users of the document for the next revision of why you're changing it and where you've changed the document. Because if we can't trust the document and just issuing out revision after revision without clearly notifying them of where the changes occur, obviously nobody's going to look at it, and it's going to become a very useless document, and us trying to use it as a contract document is thwarted in a way. So as far as some details, I've gone through and marked up a typical roof parapet plan. So as you can see, as far as this complete level of detail, as far as where this detail occurs, level 3, grid line T, all the assemblies seem to be tagged. You've got detail callouts where they're typically provided. All the minimum notes and small clearances are provided within the details, so relatively complete. Obviously, things to look out for, like I mentioned earlier, are transitions between trades. So how you're going to sequence this unique type of flashing reveal, who's best to do it. Obviously, things to consider are access. Usually roofers stick to the roof. So giving them a piece of flashing that's 3 stories up in the air on the outside of the building may not make sense. But again, talk through this with your trades and make sure that it makes sense from a closure perspective of who picks up certain things like this. You got to watch out for, when you're coloring these drawings, your color overlap. So you actually have to plan out where you're going to color certain markups, because as you can see here, obviously there was an overlap of the yellow and the blue. This is a very visual document, so we want to make sure that if there is any ambiguity in the color and say, this green now looks for whatever reason to be this green, obviously it's not a siding element, but that's where the confusion can start to creep into a document like this. So making sure you're consistent with your coloring and where you're delineating the scope and not having that color overlap, so the intent is clear when you look at the drawing. And again, reviewing for sequence and installation, talking to the consultants about why they ran this board all the way through the underside of the parapet. Is it needed from a steel stud perspective to have that? It causes an early mobilization for the roofer to get in before steel stud could build that parapet. All these things just to question while you're marking up the drawings. Easy enough to submit an RFI or talk to a project director or somebody to talk through sequencing and be like, oh no, that's typical, we do it for XYZ reason, and really going through the detail in that way. At high level, this is kind of the end product. You want to make sure that all the notes are tagged so the specific trade knows that they're picking up that scope of work as far as the assembly, but then the applicable note that goes along with it, just so we're, again, belts and suspenders as far as our level of communication with the trades, noting that we've gone through every note, every detail, and made sure that we're providing a complete set of drawings that are scoped out in a way that we intend to build the project. Obviously up for interpretation as far as who does what is, and we can change it if need be, like we said, but overall presentation with the scope of work legend in the corner properly communicates our intent for scope of work and issued out to trades. So one thing that I forgot to touch on was actually when to do this in the tendering process. Obviously, this is a document that sets a baseline precedent for how we're going to tender the scopes. So we want to do this early on in the tender to make sure that the trades have enough time to talk to their, in some cases, subs, to make sure that the intent of the scope and how they're going to bid it is clear from an ETRO perspective early on. So then that way it gives the trades enough time to go and coordinate with their own departments or own external subs, and make sure that they know that this is the way we want the job priced. So then those subs can then make sure that they price to our subs with that pricing in mind. So then that way they're carrying the full scope. So again, do this early. Hopefully within the first week of sending out a tender, this document goes out fully fleshed out with all these details and the scope markups, and use it as a basically an addendum, if you will. So getting into it, here's kind of the high level video that Jerome's put together for us for his module. And I will, without further ado, here we go. So what Jerome's doing is going through and installing the tool chest right now. So you're going to go into manage tool sets and then use the add. The reason why we're clicking add instead of import is to make sure that any updates that are done in the master tool chest are pushed in the future revision to you automatically. So this file path and where Jerome's finding these templates, this file path will be shared on ETRO Way. We're developing a current module that'll fit somewhere between C109 and C110, but obviously this video will serve as a reference for uploading this tool chest. So he's just going over this update being pushed and the central tag, meaning that when any kind of update is done to the tool chest will be pushed automatically to you. So now you can see the tool chest is loaded on the left-hand side here. So we're changing it from a symbol process to a detail. So then that's going to break out your visibility to each scope of work and its intended trade division. So he's just going over the next steps. So he's going to show some recent markups. So here's an in progress set. So I'm just going to show you some sample markups on the page. So he's going to mark up the cladding here with the appropriate siding cladding division. So he's just going to go over some tips. So he's saying this recent tools. So if you're going through a few scopes and they say you're using shotcrete cladding and for whatever reasons, structural steel as your divisions, you can bring those up into your recent tools and tag them as a kind of hotbar. So then that way, instead of scrolling through this list every time, it'll give you the availability to grab those more quickly as you're familiar with them for the day's markups. So now he's got hotkeys based on green is number one, purple is number two, and it just speeds up his markup review with those. So again, if you're using doing envelope markups with curtain wall, you'd have your three sub trades, 1, 2, and 3 as far as hotkeys, and then it's just a quicker version or quicker access for those markups. So then we're going to add a legend. So this is a dynamic legend. This is loaded within the tool chest. So he's clicked that tool, drag and drop onto the page. And what it's doing is picking up the markups specific to the page that you've done. So on locally on this drawing, those scopes have been identified. There we go. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So that was the video. So, and then just to address kind of what's coming in the ETRO way update, like I alluded to earlier. So this is a tender set drawing markup module. It'll exist somewhere in the realm of C109 and C110 as far as our string of process. Obviously covered under the ETRO way module, we'll extract some of this information as far as the rationale, the benefits, things to consider. The markup process, the video will be posted. Obviously, you'll be able to listen to the audio yourselves and hear Jerome's lovely voice, as well as the written process. Cover the tips and tricks as far as the application, using it in your Schedule B, or it'll have this sample Schedule B verbiage that'll refer to then the drawings that you'll note in your Appendix C, and then file saving best practices, that's your revision tracking, all that kind of stuff, and reference guides, precedent documents, so we'll have some samples in there, best practices, and any lessons learned that us from the pre-con team or anyone that's delved into this this process we'll share with you there. So any questions from anybody?
I got a few questions for you, Travis.
Perfect.
So is estimating in pre-con, are they doing this for every single proposal and tender?
Not at this time. We're doing it more for the larger projects. So UBCDs, the Oak Ridge food halls, that kind of stuff, as far as the TIs and that, but we are intending to roll it out into more and more projects.
Okay.
But no, at this time, no, it's not done on every single one.
Okay, and then considering you guys are putting pre-con estimating, you're putting a ton of time into this and effort. What does the handover process look like to the operations team, just to make sure that this doesn't get lost in translation, that all of this work can actually be utilized by the operations team?
Mm-hmm. So our intended location for this to exist is in the trade contracts folder. So then that way it's housed right beside the master subcontracts, and then the tender scope markups would live right there. So then that way, as we're scoping out jobs and creating your subcontracts, that document should be front of mind for everybody. And this should be a review handover process that we have as far as a typical sit down with you guys at the kickoff meeting and go through whether or not be a site logistics plan, a sequencing document. This should be bolstered into one of the documents that we'll review if it exists for the project.
Good. Yeah, and then I guess in that kickoff meeting, you're going over previous RFIs submitted through the pre-con team, methodology and sequencing that you guys have thought about already and put a lot of effort in, so that it can be relayed to us and see if we decide we want to tweak anything or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And we'd ask obviously for your feedback for the team members that weren't involved during the tendering. Obviously, there'll be probably some overlap with project directors, but yeah.
Does your Bluebeam need to be the newer version to utilize this tool chest?
I utilized it in 2015, and then I pushed to 2020, and it's still okay.
Good. That's all I got.
Travis,
Anything else from anybody?
how do you typically track your revisions? Is that a Google sheet, or where's that getting tracked?
It's physically on a document. So as you make revisions, so that's why it's important to have, like, once you've finished your markups and they're issued to the trades, that document is saved, and then a new one is copied and called working file. And then as you make those changes between those two issuances, you're basically making sure that within the Bluebeam session, it is easy to follow through and see what revisions were made based on date, but it's up to the user making the revision to cloud it, mark it as an R1 or whatever, and then save that document as the next milestone as soon as it's issued, and then create the next working copy.
Thank you.
Hey, Travis, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
The do those markup drawings, do they get like put on to the like appendix B's and scopes of work after the trades like accepted, so there's no like fighting on site, like through like the
Correct.
roofer, like you were saying, like who's doing that flashing, you know, all the finger pointing? Is that like attached to their contract so it's clear?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
great.
the intent of the document, is we cut out a lot of the hopeful verbiage in the Appendix B and just a singular line item, which again, what I touched on for here is Jerome's developed some sample Appendix B verbiage there under application. So we'll have that as kind of a one-liner for your subcontract, and then it'll refer to the Appendix C, which should hopefully also list those drawings, saying that these are the scope markups, and they become a contract document for you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.